Well, welcome everybody to our panel. Today we're going to talk about creating touchstones in emergent narratives. The full description, of course, is on the South by webpage. So we're going to start with introductions of the panelists, and I will go last. So we'll start with Kimberly.
Okay, perfect. Hey folks, I'm Kimberly Unger. I've been in the games industry for just over 20 years now. I started in the PC side. I ran a mobile game studio for about 10 years, and now I've made the jump over to virtual reality, working with content strategy at Oculus.
Terrific, thank you. Juliana?
Hi, it's good to be here. I am a high-end tilt brush artist. I've worked over 15 years in brand entertainment, casual games, and education, and mostly I've been working as an instructor. I've been designing it in the game space for quite a few years, but have also migrated to the VR spaces. And I'm very passionate about all things storytelling and where they may translate.
Terrific, thank you. And Sandy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy Chen. I've been working in the game industry for about 20 years as a writer, a producer, and a game designer. I am interested in storytelling and emotional connection, and have been involved in many projects, educational and entertainment.
Thank you. And my brief introduction, Matthew Farber. I'm an assistant professor of technology, innovation, and pedagogy at the University of Northern Colorado. My research and work is in the intersection of game-based learning and social and emotional learning. So skills that can be taught, such as perspective taking and empathy, which can be taught using games neurologically. And also some in storytelling as well, and narrative design with kids, having youth design and create games, and some other projects that I guess I can circle back to during our panel. So thank you for joining us today.
Okay, I guess we can get started. So the first question that I have posed for you is, what is an emergent experience? And I'm going to ask Sandy.
Okay. Well, we usually think of an emergent experience as something that is unscripted. It comes from the player's experience and what they decide to do. It is not something that a writer decided this is the pathway or a writer or designer decided, or you are going to go down this path and have these events happen to you. Emergent narratives are personal to how the player is going through the game, and therefore everyone can have a different emergent experience.
Fabulous. And why is emergent gameplay a desirable thing? I'm going to pose that to you, Kimberly.
Sure. So, emergent narratives are the result of making an emotional connection to a player. Mm-hmm. They help deepen the game experience and provide a better experience for the player all around. And they can help players connect with each other through their gameplay and through their game experiences in a way that they might not if they're just following the game as it's laid out.
Okay. Same question to you, Matthew. Again, I think it's very important. Why is emergent gameplay a desirable thing?
Sure. Let's see. Well, big question.
Yes.
Well, it's a desirable thing because a really good game is one that has what they call like a possibility space. So you have the affordances and constraints in place just enough so players can explore, and then just by that virtue, there are emotions like curiosity, surprise, discovery that are really really key to what games and also XR bring to narratives compared to other forms of media. So it's those need to be in place. I think you can't have too much of a constraint. we see these like in some learning games where it's, click the right answer and then we'll call it like a game show type of game. There's not enough of a possibility space to play around in. The other end of the spectrum might be like a Minecraft, right? Where you can explore in those spaces. And I think those are just pretty amazing. I also think about different types of emergent narratives and an emergent gameplay, which are either top down or bottoms up, like what is the designer putting in place for those to be emergent compared to what are the players, sort of like a grassroots versus, what is dictated by the game itself. And it's interesting, you might think an open world game, which could be anything from Super Mario Odyssey to Lara Croft to a sandbox game like Minecraft or Roblox. Those seem more natural for emergent narratives, but not necessarily, right? We see those in games that have a level design and a story mode. So I don't know if that's fully answering, but
I think that spreads a lot.
Try to take us further down the rabbit hole.
Okay, well, I'm going to insert one thing. I think emergent gameplay and an emergent experience is something that incorporates what we understand in the XR world, what we know, what we think is familiar, because everything is changing in that place. And I think that emergent gameplay actually brings about or introduces new areas of technology mixed with, narrative games, so that we're in this vast area of liminal space of what is possible. Okay. All right, so the next question up is, where do you encounter emergent narratives most often, and what makes you notice them? I'm going to ask Kimberly.
Well, for me, I find emergent narratives popping up in narrative games, in games with spaces that have things left unanswered, right? Sometimes you'll have games that have, rooms that don't have anything in them, right? Or you'll have games that have simple actions that may have been put into the game to help fill out the experience, but maybe don't have any purpose of their own. As an example, pots in Skyrim, right? You can pick up pots and dishes and collect them. And now we have people collecting, entire rooms full of the same object, right? That's an example of the kind of emergent play you see. So wherever there's a space in a game that can be filled with story, but hasn't been, I find that's where the players tend to sort of collect.
Can I direct the same question to Matthew and then Sandy?
Sure. I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Some of the folks in the game industry I've spoken with in this past year are also former Imagineers at Disney. And I like to think about like, not just like the dark rides themselves in Disney parks, how they're game-like, or how games are sort of like dark rides where you're on a rail and you're being turned to look at the different, environments and those sorts of things. But let's think about like Disney's Galaxy's Edge, right? That's different, right? So when you're in a Disney park and the different lands, you're immersed, and there are characters. You could see Peter Pan walking by and talk to Peter Pan, right? But when you're in Galaxy's Edge, it's different in that you are now in the narrative, right? You can interact. You can use your phone, and you can interact with the different clues and puzzles that are around Galaxy's Edge. You can also, you're part of the show. So the characters will come up to you, and you're in the middle of the story as stormtroopers will yell at the guests, and they have their pew pew guns out and everything, right? You're in the story, right? So I think that's amazing because not only do you let go of your everyday self like you would in a game when you're in a Disney park, but even more so when you're in Galaxy's Edge because you are now a player in that narrative. And I find this interesting in transmedia also. So I've been playing Tales from Galaxy's Edge on Oculus. And you are in a story that's set in the same land that's in Galaxy's Edge. And it's really interesting how we can dip in and out of those stories and play in those environments and we are active participants. So I think it's really interesting that it's not just in like traditional video games, but in our world today, play is everywhere. It's in smart speakers, smart watches, almost all of our interactions.
Great. I will direct the same question to Sandy. Where do you encounter emergent narratives and most often, and what makes you notice them?
I think that the emergent narratives are coming out of an intersection of what is possible within the design. I point to the example of the dogs in The Witcher. They cry piteously when you kill them, and some people, they feel so guilty. They're looking at their dogs and they're like, I don't really want to do this quest. I'd rather go kill wolves. I'd rather go look in cupboards and see if they have this, what I need. Or there's even an example of the dogs that follow them, and there's a stray dog that follows you and is, while you're trying to kill monsters and is liable to get killed, but you can spend your chapter trying to save the dog from getting into dangerous situations. So this isn't something that is really related to the overall story, but it's maybe important to the player's story, right? So it's just like the pots that was Kimberly was talking about. It's something you can do, and it's something that you can decide that you want to spend your time caring about. Those are emergent narratives that are often in the small spaces of games that become very important to a player's experience. And so I don't think that we go about trying to notice them unless they become a cultural phenomenon, and you see memes and you see that, oh, other people are doing this too. And wow, so you reach out of the space of the actual game, and you connect to others, and maybe you start to have like comparing your pot collection or something like that. And then you will start to notice them. But I think when you're playing the game itself, you don't want to bring too much notice to it, because you're just enjoying it and you're like, hey, you have curiosity, you want to do this, you want to do that. It's when you hit against the limit that then maybe you start to notice that my space is not as open as I thought it was. But if you want to go and fish and just spend your time fishing, then you should be open, to doing that. The types of stories that we hear are often part of just what happened. Like, I got away with doing something in Grand Theft Auto, but then at that last moment, for some reason I was at a toll booth and I decided to ran past, and now there's police chasing me, and it's just at that particular moment this happened. Those are things that players relate to other players in their storytelling, but not something that the designer would have set out and written down. But so they notice it in that way, but I don't think they'll notice it and say hey, look at my emergent experience I had in Grand Theft Auto. It's just be hey, you know what happened to me? This is just what happened. It's so, it's so cool, or it's so crazy, or it's so funny. That's how I think it would be experienced.
I think that's really neat, because you really can't think about everything as a writer or a producer. You can't even foresee what people are going to be doing with your words and with your story.
I have a question. As Sandy was explaining that, I was thinking about what some in the media have called the game of the coronavirus moment, which is Animal Crossing: New Horizons, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of that seems to be so open, so less goal-centered, that there are lots of memes of Tom Nook and Isabel saying little quotes, and then what players do in the game and what they assemble. But it seems to me that there are a lot of events that run in the game just to get people to play the game. It's almost like guilting you to play the game. Or if you don't do these things before Halloween, you won't have the store to buy the costume to go trick-or-treating. And I just wonder about like the engagement of players. Like, where is that line, or is there a line between, what's around and about the game, in like memes and things like that, compared to what Nintendo's doing to get folks to play the game, or if that game would be even as popular as it is if it wasn't for physical distancing and lockdowns.
Well, I think you raised a really good point about the physical distancing and lockdowns. And I think games, of course, the participation has shot up tremendously. So, what do we do? What do we do to engage ourselves as we deal with the rest of the world that's happening? So you raised a really interesting point in that I think it has really increased the level of participation in a genre that most people would never have thought of. Mm-hmm. And that also includes things like, social gaming, which a lot of people have been indulging in now, simply because it eliminates, or it tends to decrease that level of isolation and helps with the mental health situation.
So I wrote an article on my blog recently about live action online games because live action role playing has during the pandemic had come to a standstill, and they actually use something like a Zoom meeting to conduct these fictional stories, places where naturally the story leads to an interview and interviewing suspects or interviewing witnesses or something like that, and so that a large number of players can participate at the same time in voting what happens to these various characters that the characters may have just come to life at that particular moment because it's live action. So definitely people are coming up with new and novel ways to still maintain that kind of social connection and game playing.
At USC, when the lockdowns first started, there was a Zoom jam, and it's on zoomjam.org, and it was like a game jam using the constraints of Zoom, and they're really interesting. They have all the winning games there. Like, for one example is if your cat actually like jumps in the frame with you, you have to leave the frame, and everybody else has to tell a story about the cat. So it's really interesting. Everything becomes playable.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's one of the keys when you're looking for emergent narratives, right? It's the point at which the game or the tool or the experience runs out. That's where you really start to sort of see it blossoming, right? Is once, I always say you can't think outside the box unless you start with a box, right? When you hit the edges of the box, that's where emergence starts to show up, right? And that's where you get people building games, jumping from YouTube video to YouTube video to YouTube video, or playing games, whether you're running a D&D session on Zoom with the 8 people that you can never get together in real life anyway, right? Because everyone's got kids and jobs and cats and everything. Or whether you're people have been hosting work meetings in games like Fortnite, or in places like Pop One, right? People are taking these existing tools and they're turning them to their own purposes, which is really, where emergent starts to appear.
Right. And so one question I would have to all of you is because it can be so open, and what kind of rules or limitations should we have upon this experience, or should we think about that at all? Maybe you can give me your opinion, Kim.
I think rules are useful. I think rules are useful in they give new people a comfortable framework to work within, right? One of the reasons I think Animal Crossing is as popular as it is there's tight constraints on things like player communication. You really have to work to act out in something like New Horizons. So I think they serve a combination of allowing new people to onboard into a space comfortably, but they also serve as something that experienced people can work against actively. right? So they're serving a twofold purpose, right? When you first come in, you don't know what you're doing. You can follow the basic tutorial. You can have those basic interactions. And then once you've been playing it for, a year, you've got all the toys and you're, building, you're taking your island and re-landscaping it so it looks like a koala bear, and pushing those tools to the furthest that they can possibly go. So I think good rules can serve more than one gameplay purpose, as opposed to just being a constraint, which is how a lot of people regard them.
When you're saying that, I'm thinking about Among Us and how that's become so popular this year, particularly with kids, but it's just how it mimics recess play. I know my son, when he goes to school, they'll play Among Us IRL in real life with pool noodles so they can socially distance. But it's funny because it's kind of also taking some of the mechanics of like werewolf or mafia, along with hide and seek and tag, and putting it in this game with there are lots of constraints. For instance, the meeting, right? The emergency meeting, there's only so much you can type to do that social deduction. I also saw an article about added constraints into Among Us. So each of the characters are a different color. So some players, after playing so much, they change the name of the color. So if your color is red, you make your name blue, which is the opposite of what you should do when you're designing a game. Typically, it's called the Stroop test. So if you read a list of words, red, blue, yellow, and they're in those aligned colors, and then round 2, red may be written with blue, and you have to still say red, and it causes more cognitive friction. It affects your cognitive load, and it slows things down. That's why when you're dying in Fortnite, it's red, right? It's not it's not blue, right? But they add that friction to Among Us, and I think that's really interesting. Yeah, that's great.
All right. And here's another question for you. What is a touchstone in emergent narratives? And I'm going to ask Kimberly to start.
Touchstones are those points, those opportunities you give a player to diverge from the written narrative or from the game as it's currently designed. Those can be those empty spaces that I talked about earlier. They can be a tool or a rule that can be broken and used sort of out of type. I was working with a game studio many years ago, and they were developing a children's game where kids had to vacuum up the correct letters off the floor using a vacuum cleaner. And they discovered the very first thing the kids did when they got the vacuum cleaners, they tried to vacuum everything else, right? And so that's a case of they built into the game the ability to vacuum other things out of the environment. They built that in as a touchstone where, hey, yes, we've given you this tool, but we're going to give you sort of non-linear ways to use the tool. We're going to give you some opportunities to do something other than just what you're supposed to do. And so I think that you run into this kind of thing. We tend to think of them as cookies, right? Or we tend to think of them as Easter eggs in games. It's a moment or an element that if you try something different, it gives you a different response that isn't required, but is satisfying and encourages you to look for those responses elsewhere.
Interesting. I was just going to say the same thing in terms of VR and technology in VR games, where, I mean, you're opening up a new technology and a set of affordances to determine how do you navigate the space and how do you interact with the characters, and how do you even relate to what's going on. And one of those places is in VR theater, where you're taking the ability to walk around and scream, touch things, and the narrative designer has no ability to possibly curtail you because you're in that VR space where you can go around and touch things and do whatever that they don't want you to do. So I think, especially in VR theater, as you go through the narrative, like I just saw Krampusnacht and the Underpresents. They are trying to gently move you through the narrative, and yet they're also cognizant of the fact that they have no control over you. So a lot of it is improv and then emergent narratives, and then can we get to the finish line and have a cohesive story altogether?
Right, and I want to add that you still need a designer for these experiences. You may not know the order or if the player will ever get to the top of the mountain, but if they get to the top of the mountain, maybe something wonderful happens, and you decide that, you know, for the players that get to the top of the mountain, this is the experience. There's some kind of great experience will happen. And so I think the danger in terms of having nothing planned is that you can have a player have a really boring emergent experience, a frustrating emergent experience where they're just circling the same route over and over because they have no idea what to do, what to go, or what they're supposed to be doing. They don't have a goal. They're not directed. And also, in terms of if you have a community, you know, there are things where it happened in games where they gave abilities to build something and they built a strip bar or something like that, or things that you don't want other kids to see. So if you have some community guidelines, you may want to have those, you know, respected, and you still have to have parameters, and you still have to have a designer there to gently guide the player and direct them toward some of those touchstones that they may be able and get to experience.
Do you ever want to recapture your players, direct them back to the original narrative of the game? And I'm going to ask Sandy first, and then followed by Kimberly, and then Matthew.
I think it depends on the game. Certainly, if it's something they want to do, a single player game, they want to spend their time buying and selling goods instead of, you know, following the main storyline of Fallout, then sure, maybe they'll spend hours just doing that. As, you know, they'll become like the tycoon of that apocalypse. That's how they enjoy themselves. But there may be, you know, if you think that they're lost, they're frustrated or something, then yes, you do want to get them back into the game, because otherwise, well, one, you would get a bad review, but they would lose like the original purpose and the intent of, you know, where is the gameplay? Where is it fun? They're missing out on the fun. So we do want to direct them back. I mean, I think about Mario Kart, where if you were losing, then there are actually some mechanics to help you along. And if you're winning, then there are ways to slow you down, because the fun of Mario Kart is not seeing somebody so far ahead that you would never win, or being so behind that you could never win at all. So we do have to think about, is this a fun experience? Is this a meaningful experience? Is this, you know, if they're going to, you know, buy and trade and they're having fun doing that. And there's certainly some games that are more simulation type. And, you know, it's supposed to be an experience like that, then fine. Okay, it does depend on the game. But I think that we do need to watch out and say that, make sure that the player experience is always a good one and a positive one. And if they're really off track, then we need to help direct them back to the main path.
And I think it's worth noting too, you know, if you have a player who's in a game and they've gone off on a side tangent, there's no harm in trying to recapture them. It's not going to negatively impact their experience, because they know they've gone off, you know, sort of 45 degrees to the story. So by designing these recapture moments, you know, you're providing the opportunity to players who may have gotten lost, but you're not actively impacting the experience of players who are deliberately sort of going and doing their own thing, right? It's almost like it's just a gentle reminder, right? That, hey, there's this other story over here that you might want to pay attention to. But and again, I'm looking back at Skyrim, right? There's a couple of quests where if you don't address the quest for long enough, then sort of the bad guys and the acolytes from various factions start randomly popping up and attacking you, and you'll be in the middle of the woods somewhere, and like, aha, all of a sudden, just to remind you. And they're not heavy duty encounters, and they're almost never encounters that you can't win fairly handily, but they exist to remind you that you've accepted a quest and that you haven't played it out yet. But it doesn't stop your progress. If you're off collecting jars and stacking them in your house, then these occasional moments will add spice, but they're not going to stop you from having your own fun as well. So I think recapture mechanics are great for recapturing, but I think they're not detrimental anyway. So there's not really a downside to putting them in, unless it's a blocker of some kind, unless it's like, oh, well, we're only going to let you collect 50 pots until you kill this, until you kill this guy in a robe, right? That's where you start to run into problems, where it becomes a wall rather than an experience or a reminder.
Nice.
Build off of that. I've had my hand in designing some games here and there, but mainly curriculum around games and adapting games for learning and those sorts of uses. And so I would argue that it's about the game, but it also can depend on the player of the game. So I'm thinking about like an open world game, like Red Dead Redemption 2, or I actually tried to play Mass Effect 4 when that came out, and I thought it was too open. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, and I stopped playing. Red Dead Redemption 2 is, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Like, so I think they do a really good job in Red Dead Redemption 2 of still keeping it constrained enough that I know what I'm supposed to be doing, right? So I could go fishing all day if I want. There was an interesting article earlier, I think maybe last year, from the Audubon Society about how you can go bird watching like it's 1899 because it's so accurate like that. And you can do that. You can go around and take photos of the birds or screenshots of that time period, right? And that's interesting. But to an extent, an open world game is an illusion of free choice. Agency is a sense. You want players to sense that they have control over the experience, but it's towing the line. It can't be too much, otherwise it's just a total sandbox, right? So players may get intentionally bored, so they're going to say, "Well, I'm going to go over here so I can start the mission." Once you start the mission, then it's less open. It's you go through the story of the mission itself, right? But again, I think about the player. So I don't know, to use my son as an example again, right? He's 10, playing Super Mario Odyssey, right? He plays the game, he finishes the whole game. When he's done finishing the whole game, he will go back, and he's a completionist. He'll go look for all of the other moons. He'll get all of the stickers you could put on the Mario Odyssey balloon. I don't do that. When I finish Tomb Raider or I finish Red Dead Redemption, I don't go back and finish all the quests or to make sure I get all the stickers. But kids, generally speaking, will tend to do that. Even if they have other games to play, it's not like I only have this one, like when I grew up, NBA Jam in the 90s, that's all I had. So I played as much as I could, right? But even with having other games at their disposal, kids tend to be like completionists. So I'm working on a project with Tracy Fullerton and Matthew Hamilton, a grad student. And Tracy's game, she's taking the lead on her game, which is Walden, a game, which is this big open world game of Henry David Thoreau's Walden. And we created different modules to be played by high school students. And we took the 6-hour game and made it into or Tracy did this part, of course, the game part, 20 to 30 minute modules that you can play in any order. But she discovered the same thing, that from feedback from teachers, that students want more of goals in a goalless game, essentially. Or they want arrowheads to collect, and the arrowheads have quotes on them from Henry David Thoreau. And that was added to some of the different versions of the games because of the player. So an adult player may not look for all those or go back and collect all the arrowheads, but a 14 or 15-year-old might do that, or a 10-year-old might do that. So it's interesting to also think about the audience.
That's interesting.
Sorry about
Because
the
it's,
long answer.
oh, perfect. Because I was actually thinking about, directing back people to the original narrative of say VR theater. Like, I mean, again, it's so difficult to stage such an endeavor, like that kind of story. And then so you kind of actually have to write in like cues as to, hey, you know what? Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to become King Midas, and we're going to be picking up the gold pieces. So you've got to bring back and provide some sense of understanding of where we're going to go to next. Mm-hmm. So continuing, and again, people have different kinds of ways of responding. A lot of people, the first thing they do when they go into any virtual space is they just go run free. They just go absolutely go nuts, right? Because that's the nature of gamers. They'll pick up everything. It's not just gamers, it's just anybody else. There's everybody from the person who will just stand there and kind of like wait for instruction, mm-hmm. Especially if it's in an immersive space. And then those other ones who just like go swimming, go touching everything, doing everything that you don't possibly would like them to do. So again, you got to, write a script that sort of gently brings them back to the story, and that kind of moves the story forward, especially in those times of transitions. So you've got story, and then beats within the story, and then it's got to go from one area to another, and sometimes that requires transporting. So then you've got to go, okay, now how do we bring that person to the next stage and make it sort of curious and interesting as well, so that we don't lose anybody. So that's one thing. And then another thing that it's really important, the reason why we should bring back people back to games, back to the central original narrative, it's for transmedia needs. So so for example, I think we all know, and I think Matthew alluded to this, the canon, the Star Wars canon, right? So, but from the Star Wars canon has branched so many other different transmedia properties, such as the Mandalorian, mm-hmm. right? So if you don't know who Star Wars is, if you don't really understand the canon, there's this way in which we can investigate that story so that we can sort of understand where the rest of the other stories come from. Mm-hmm. And the most interesting thing that I've been noticing just lately is that people are actually using their characters, like the Mandalorian and the baby Yodas, right? Mm-hmm. And they're populating other games with those particular characters, mm-hmm. with the same characteristics, right? That's tuned to those particular stories. So that's my reason of why it's kind of important, and not only just from a monetization model to bring people back to the central narrative. How do we create meaningful moments using art, sound, game, and gameplay? And I'm going to bring it over to Kimberly, and then Sandy, and then Matthew. Would that be okay?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
One of the things that I started in this industry on the art side, so I have a particular love for joyous visual moments. The way that we create sort of juicy expressions, juicy elements, whether it be in the way that a room is lit or the textures that we happen to be using on a surface. Mm-hmm. And I think that we can place those in the story. We can place those at significant moments in the story to help connect a player, right? To help inform the player that this piece is important or that piece is important. We can use it to direct their attention, and we can use it, to a certain degree to sort of influence their emotional state, sort of tie them into that a little bit tighter.
Mm. Sandy?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was next. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about adaptive music and how you can have different themes for different characters. And say you had a supporting cast that got killed and maybe their theme is gone, but maybe you're triumphant at the end, and whoever remains, you can have their themes intertwined. I also think about art. We can put in lots of nice artwork with maybe, hieroglyphics or something that, the players may have to go outside and try to translate or figure out, what is the culture, this lost culture that was here. So there's definitely lots of opportunities for Easter eggs and so forth. And, I think that there's actually our meaningful moments will have a combination of everything: the gameplay, the art, the music, the sound. It's not really just going after one thing at all. We're going to see everything to enhance the experience.
Thank you. Matthew?
Well, I'd like to reference Celia Hodent's work on game feel, what she calls game feel, right? So
Yeah.
it is exactly these art, sound, and gameplay moments. For instance, in a Mario game, when Mario can jump and twirls around and spins, or an example that Celia uses is loot crates in Fortnite, like the llama, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like it's what makes games feel joyful. It's not like you click a folder on your computer desktop and it opens up a file. That's not what happens when you encounter a loot crate in Fortnite. It's a llama pinata, and you hit the pinata, and the eye of the llama follows the player when wherever you are on the screen, right? And it's this playful interaction. And if you pay attention to those things in well-designed games, you'll see them a lot. There are always some sort of playful interaction in something that would ordinarily be mundane. And I think those are wonderful moments that games afford.
Cool. I'm going to add a different thing. So I looked at meaningful moments and differently. They're really just grounded in memories, right? They're grounded in related experience, and they're affected by our cultures and our beliefs and the things that we grew up with. So one way that I see music being played out is not just in the virtual space, but in games like Beat Saber. You've got all these packs that that connect us to the kind of musics that we kind of like, but it's intergenerational in a way. So if I grew up in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, I can actually share my music with my children or my friends who could also play Beat Saber along with me. And while doing so, I'm creating a sense of not only just memories for myself, but for everybody else. And so we're hearkening back to different eras and periods and bringing up a whole sense of world building and perhaps relating to each other through the lyrics and through the shared experiences. So music, in a sense, is really important. And anything that, say, in an art-directed piece that evokes nostalgia or a sense of relatability, or even in places like that could advocate social, what do you call it? Aims, goals, like, for example, advocating Black Lives Matter, adding artifacts into particular games that promote that sort of thing, like diversity and the philosophy of inclusion. I think games are very powerful and being able to create memorable and meaningful moments.
Oh, so actually, let's continue on this conversation about XR, the VR, AR, AI, or 360. And how do you think those technologies allow players to explore games in novel ways? Are there any challenges? Go to Kim for.
So, my space is VR in particular at the moment, but I'm seeing it pop up in other sort of expanded reality spaces and XR spaces where players are disinclined to follow the rules once they sort of figure out where the boundaries of what they can do are. One of the interesting things about working in VR is it is theater in the round, right? Things can come at you from every direction. It's an interesting gameplay challenge to solve because we're used to being able to direct the player's attention. And for VR, I find that you have to work a little bit harder to get players to go the right direction, to pick up the right boxes. And it's a little more like working with a LARP, right? You sort of have to clearly define the gameplay elements versus the world building elements, or versus the non-world building elements. And I think that, there's an opportunity to give players these more immersive spaces, and to allow, one of the tricks with game design is that every poly has a purpose, right? Everything that is in a game world was created and built, and there's code behind it and art assets behind it. So there's a certain amount of forethought that goes into everything that is in a game world, but providing players with the ability to use those elements in non-linear ways and sort of non-standard ways, right? So for example, one of my favorite game moments of all time is in Portal, where you have to put the companion cube in the incinerator, right? Because in the back of the story, the AI has been talking to you about this companion cube and about how it's your best friend, everything. And then when you get to the incinerator and you have to chuck it in there, many people pause and are like, well, wait, what if I just haven't triggered it right? What if there actually is a personality or a robot helper or something in this companion cube, right? And, when you're, one of the first things a player does is it looks for other things to throw in the incinerator, right? And so when you're building these worlds and when you're designing in VR, you have an opportunity to give the player those moments, right? It's like, okay, so you can either completely empty out the room and have the incinerator and the companion cube, and there's only one option, or you can expand those options by giving the player a lot of things that they can chuck in. And, while it requires some forethought with regards to resources, I think in VR, players are starting to look more broadly for things that are in their worlds, and for things that they can do that the game designers have included that maybe weren't part of the game, right? Like, I can kick over the stack of boxes. Well, in a 2D game, okay, you can kick over the stack of boxes, and but in VR, you can pick them up, you can throw them, you can build a stack of boxes and stand on top of them to get to something that's maybe unfinished and jump outside the world box, right? And so the non 2D nature of standing in a VR world makes people think in non 2D fashions, in a non-linear fashion, that I think is going to be a new place for game designers to really expand in the future.
I want to riff. I'm just going to add something to that too. Recently, I played Fisherman's Tale. Have you ever played that? It's a VR game, right? And it won the award, I believe, in 2019. And there's another game called, I can't, I'll come back to it. But one of the things is we've got hands now, right? So that adds another modality. Oh no, now we got hands, like what you were just saying. What do we do? What do we pick up? What do we clutch? How do we, as the writer is trying to direct people to where the end goal, whatever that might be, and they're trying to give specific ideas or hints as to, okay, now go over there, pick up this thing, find the key, open up the door, so you've got these people who are now in headsets who all of a sudden have to learn really quickly how to onboard, Like, okay, so now I don't understand. Now I've got hands. Now I guess I can do things. So they're moving everything all around. And so if you're not really great at puzzles, it's really incumbent upon the narrative designer to come in and kind of like provide thoughts and examples of how to do what and where to find, certain things. So like, I know I've spent some time kind of, where's the key? Where do I go? So there's that sense of like, do I give you more information? Do I give you enough? What's the timing frame? What exactly psychologically do I need to understand in order to like sort of like move the player to a different place? Mm-hmm. And is it take 5 seconds? Does it take 10 seconds? And how long will it take for the player to get frustrated? Mm-hmm. So, that's one of those things. Another challenge is the same things that we're actually encountering in 2D games, which is things like trolling and bullying and things like that. And it's coming into the 3D space in a way that it's really difficult and hard to predict. So, for example, in alt space, in VR chat especially, you've got a lot of kids, you've got a lot of people in there who can be really, I think, challenging in a sense to sort of help them to understand what are the basic rules. Mm-hmm. So, those are a couple of things.
Matt, did you have something to add?
I'll be quick, I guess. From the player perspective, one thing I was thinking about were different types of VR experiences. One in particular was from Shell Games, I Expect You to Die, which is like this, the line from Goldfinger, and they just announced a sequel to the game. But it's an escape room for one, which is interesting in itself, that, often escape rooms are for multiple players. And they created a game. There's a photo of the design process in Jesse Schell's newest version of his book, The Art of Game Design. And I think that's the title. But it's like they put in the studio cardboard boxes all around the designer, and you're sitting down like you're in a car or you're in a room and you have to get out before, the whole thing explodes or whatever. Or you're a window washer. And so like in the window washer level, there's like a spray. You pick up the spray bottle and spray the window. But sometimes there's no point to the objects, and sometimes there is a point to the objects. And it's really interesting. Like you can, you try to puzzle it out. And like there's a cigar in one desk. You can pick up the cigar and smoke it. And you see smoke trails in front of your face, which is a kind of a cool effect, right? In VR, but there's really not much of a purpose to it, except you're smoking the villain cigar. So it's kind of like, you're mocking the villain. But it's interesting how you look at every object differently. You look at it like, is this part of the puzzle that I need to solve? And escape rooms tend to be like that. Even when they're not VR, when you're at an escape room, everything could be a potential clue. So you're really close reading the room.
Do you have any last minute closing thoughts that you want to leave our viewers with? And I'm going to start with Matthew, go to Juliana, and then go to Sandy.
I like to think about the framework of Brian Upton, right? And Brian Upton has this framework called situational game design. So rather than thinking about what Sid Meier, maker of Civilization, famously said, games are a series of interesting choices, right? Yeah. Games are a series of interesting choices. Brian Upton and also Tracy Fullerton, she said this in several keynotes, games are a series of interesting situations. So what are the situations your players could be put in? And those are the interesting situations where emergent narratives can occur.
Juliana, you want to go next?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I would say try to discover and explore where you can insert games. I would challenge you to think about games not necessarily as being games, but maybe for a place where you can actually showcase another type of content. And I'm saying this for examples. Have you seen the Balenciaga? Mm-hmm. It's a fashion show, and what they've done is really cool. They've actually created these avatars, and they actually did the fashion show within a game world, right? So basically you get to go around and then find out through a dystopic place like what the places, what's making us crave certain experiences. Given gives a little bit of touch of things, going through a cityscape and then a ravescape and then an urbanscape. And it's really neat as we move into places like avatars and new kind of those technologies that personalize us, where we can see ourselves not just in gaming, but in other modalities and places.
My closing thoughts are for an emergent narrative is that you should think of it as an intricate dance between designer and player. And those of us who are used to directed experiences and having the control as a writer or designer, now you have a partner and this partner wants to participate and wants to have a say in what experience is going to happen. So you need to let them breathe, let them have their play and have their say in what is going to happen. And all of this may surprise you as well.
And I'll just close with saying that, games these days are a dialogue. They're not a monologue. They're not a single designer expounding their philosophy to the world in the same way you might have in a book or the same way you might have in a film. There's always a give and take between what the designer intends and what the player receives. And I think that where emergent narratives are concerned, this is an opportunity in games that we don't really have in any other kind of media. No matter what the platform for the game is, whether you're playing, Foursquare on the squash court, or whether you're, playing something on the Xbox or playing it in VR, I think that is a valuable, unique piece for games that we really need to lean into embracing and sort of using for the benefit of our players. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our panel on creating touchstones in emergent narratives. If you would like to hear more or learn more, you can check out the bios of our lovely panelists, and we will see you all again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.